G'day crew. This video is going to be a little bit different. I did go out and catch the fish that you saw in the thumbnail, which I assume encouraged you to click on this video. Other than that one fish though, it was a fairly uneventful trip. So I thought I'd add some footage I recorded a month or two ago and expand on that just a little bit. If you want to see some areas that I was fishing nearly a lifetime ago, then keep watching. But if you just want to see the fish caught that I showed in the thumbnail, then have a look in the chapter index in the video description and you can skip straight to there. This area is on the northwest side of Peel Island. I'm viewing it in fish tracks here, and I placed a mark near where I think I used to fish. The mark is near the centre of the map, and I've placed a circle flashing around it so you can't miss it even if you're looking at this on a small screen. I say the mark is near where I used to fish because when I was fishing here fairly regularly, I didn't have a GPS. In fact, back in those days, there was no such thing as GPS. I had the big boat when I fished here most often, and that meant I was fishing out of the tender, which didn't even have a depth sounder. What I did in those days was to line up the closest corner of Cucumber Point to be due east and head towards it until I could see coral under the boat. Then I turned around and made it away from the island until I couldn't see the coral anymore. When the water was reasonably clear, that meant that I was just off the edge of the coral, and I had a good time fishing. When the water was a little bit dirty, that could mean that I was still over some of the coral, and what happened then was I either moved when I realised my mistake, or I spent a lot of time re-rigging when I got snagged. I've zoomed in on the mark so that you can see some of the detail there. There are two X's flashing either side of the mark, indicating a couple of minor recesses in the coral according to the map. They may or may not be there in reality. But I put these X's in to emphasise that the method that I used to locate the fishing mark back in the day was haphazard at best. I might have been fishing on or near either of these two X points, or perhaps even further away from the mark that I put on the map, and just not knowing the difference, because remember, there was no GPS. If you do decide to have a look around this area, then spend a bit of time sounding along the edge of the coral before you decide where to fish. Go both north and south or east and west, whichever way you want to look at it. I guess northeast or southwest from the mark along the edge of the coral, and just have a look around before you decide that you want to fish in that particular spot. Keep in mind that not only was the spot that I was fishing rather approximate back in the day, but I've translated that onto a map using what I remember of my marks to line it up, so that's approximate as well. But even in a worst case scenario, it should get you within a couple of 100 metres of where I was fishing back in the day. So this is some footage that I recorded back at the beginning of October and never got around to including in a video. I had a bit of spare time on that trip, so I decided to explore one of the spots that I used to fish. As you can see on my sounder screen, there's plenty of life down there. I want to say that this area is best fished on a run-out tide, but honestly, I'm remembering details from 40 years ago, and I may well be wrong about that. My gut feeling is that I used to fish it on a run-out tide, but you'll have to experiment and see if I'm right or not. If you do decide to give this spot a go, then it might be worth trying the run-out tide first, but if you don't do any good, give other stages of the tide a try, in case I'm mistaken. So that's the coral down there. You don't want to be in this shallow, but what you want to do is go out until it starts to get a bit deeper. But what I used to do before I had a sounder was come in and then go out until you couldn't see the coral anymore, and that was where you fished. But now that we've got a sounder, we can just come along and go out to where we can't see coral on the sounder anymore. And that's where we fish. And that should be in about 6 metres of water, I would guess. There we go, we're in 6.6 metres of water and we're just losing the coral off the sounder now. And you can see on the other sounder we're getting a little bit of show of small fish. Turn around and head back in over it a little bit more again, just to show you how it goes. There you go, we're getting some fish, bait fish, what it looks like on the sounder there. Something a little bit more solid down on the bottom, maybe a lump of coral. And coming up onto the reef again now. So there's all our coral, probably brain coral. I don't know, water's not clear enough to see through, but I'm guessing it's brain coral. There used to be a lot of it around here. So swing out away from it again and we'll watch it go down. And just remember that if you're in 2 metres of water here, you're inside the green zone, so definitely can't fish there. That's 2 metres at astronomical low tide, so it is a fairly low tide now, so we're just barely touching the green zone. We've got a ways to go now before we get off this shelf. We'll just keep heading out this way. Well, actually, I might just turn us around this way and go into that little opening in the reef. Give you a look at that, because those sort of openings there catch the bait, and they're a good spot to fish if you can find them. And of course, with the charts we've got now on the sounder, it's pretty easy to find them. You do have to check it out though, because just because it's on the chart doesn't mean to say it's actually there. We'll find out in just a second. We're almost on it. Now I'll turn up to go off it. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be here. There we go. Now that hole in the reef there is an ideal spot to try. Big ball of bait holding on the bottom there. Oh, a few big balls of bait holding on the bottom there, so we're off the reef, so we don't have to worry too much about getting snagged, and we've got a bit of light down there, so yeah, good spot to try just here. Now you get all sorts of fish along here. There's snapper, tuskies, sweet lip. As I recall, I used to catch mainly snapper, grass, sweetlip and tuskfish here, but not big models of any of them. I'm pretty sure none of them came above the mid-40s, that's in centimetres, And in those days, I thought that was the right size fish to catch. I've changed my mind lately, but when I was young, I was always told that you don't want a big fish because they're dry and tough. But I've learnt now that that's just wrong. But anyway, I don't remember ever catching anything bigger here, and I was pretty happy about that back in the day. A bit further northwest of here, I did catch some bigger models at night, but the bites weren't very abundant, they were few and far between. On the other hand, right here, where I used to fish, as I remember, the bites were abundant, even if the fish were a bit on the small side and you had to throw a few of them back. You will have noticed that there were fish up on top of the reef on the fish finder as I went in over it. My experience is that these are mostly smaller models, and trying to catch them will only result in snags, even when fishing without a sinker. Fishing off the edge of the reef not only results in less snags, but in my experience, slightly larger fish. You can go north or south from the mark that I used there, just a general mark. As I say, with all the marks I put out, you have to hunt around to find the fish. They're just a starting point. This is an interesting discovery that I made when I recorded this. I'll just let it play through on fast forward for a few seconds, and then I'll talk about it. Now going back to the navionics chart in Fish Tracks to have a look at that large indent in the coral that I saw when I sounded the area. I have never, to my knowledge, fished in that recess in the coral. October 4th was the first time in my life that I can remember looking at this area with a sounder, and until then I didn't know that that recess existed. If I ever did fish in there, it was purely by accident. But the reason I make mention of it is that I like to fish these sorts of areas in the reefs. Anywhere where there's a notable discontinuity in the reef is an area where bait may conjugate. I don't know if bait will conjugate in this recess in particular, but it's something to explore. And while I don't know about this particular spot, I do know of other recesses in reefs around the various bay islands that do attract bait, and you can anchor up there or spot lock or whatever you do and pretty much guarantee to get some bites. Whether the fish are big or small depends on the area, but where the bait is concentrated, the fish are going to be, because they eat the bait. It's just that obvious. Now, I don't know which way the current's going to run at any particular tide around this area. I'm not pretending I do, but just suppose for a second that the tide runs up that recess in the reef in the direction that the arrow is flashing there. That will help to push bait into that area. And because it's a deeper area with reef either side of it, there'll be an upwelling of water towards the edges, and for some reason bait seems to collect in these areas at certain parts of the tide. Could be a run-in tide, run-out tide, those sort of things you've got to figure out. But when you find a recess in the reef like this, I think it's always worth having a good look at, because there's a few spots around the bay that have these sort of recesses that I used to fish fairly successfully and fairly regularly, if not for the big fish, at least for good pan-sized fish. And while I've been talking, I've shown the area in the navionics chart with relief shading, and also just with the contour lines for those that prefer just looking at charts with contour lines. I'll just show the 3D bathymetry of the area as well. And while we're looking at it, I'll increase the exaggeration in the height, just so you can see better the difference in the underwater terrain and how that recess runs up into the coral reef. Okay, this fellow is what I call a rock crab. I don't know whether that's the right name for it or not. They're just little fellows. Used to catch them around the rocks on the islands around the bay when I was younger. These days I get the occasional one in my crab pots when I'm going for sand crabs, so I keep them for bait. And what we used to do back in the day with these was just take probably the back leg off and maybe that leg, so number 1 and 3 leg, and put a hook in through there and back out through the other leg. Was using probably 4-bar O or 5-bar O hooks in those days. It used to tear the carapace off the top too, and then break it in half. As I said, take the number 1 and number 3 legs off, so leave that middle one, or you can take it off if you want, but the idea was to put the hook in the back hole and out through the number 3 hole was about right for the size of the hooks we were using. And yeah, half a crab, got 2 baits out of a crab, and usually get a tuskie on them. Not real big, probably 40 odd centimetres was about what we were getting. Nothing huge. The other bait we used a lot, probably more than anything else actually, because these were a bit scarce, was coral prawns. The coral prawns got a nice hard shell, so the hook stays in it a lot better, and they work really well. I was busy feeding my face, so at this point I hadn't seen a bite, and I thought I was snagged. There was no head shake, no tail beat. At this point, it was just stuck. There's still no indication that I've got a fish on the end. All I'm feeling at the moment is line stretch. And about now I started to wonder if I did have a fish on, and as Tuskfish are prone to do, it had got itself into some of the structure and jammed itself there. So I loosened the drag and let it have some slack line to see if I could coax it to come out by itself, just in case. I'm not usually impatient when I'm fishing, but after 5 minutes or so I decided that I really didn't have a fish there. It was a snag, and the best thing to do was to try and pull it out. So I locked the reel up again and let the current do its thing. In an effort to salvage my rig, I thought that if I took it off spot lock, turned the boat a little and then let it drift, that would put the line back at the opposite angle and I might be able to pull it free. At this point, the engine is idling in neutral and the boat is drifting. The boat is turning as the drift takes it past the snag. And the line finally came free. It was only a second or two after that I felt some tail beats and I realised that I really did have a fish on. Colour. I have colour. Once the fish is on board, the first order of business is to get back to my spot where I can spot lock safely and I won't drift into danger while I'm attending to my catch.
Oh. Right. Oh, shit. He's a big boy.
I was intending to grab the hook and pull it out, and then I saw the teeth. Having seen them, I thought pliers would be a better approach.
Oh. 80 centimetres.
A barotrauma is a problem when you pull Tuskies up from deeper water, as you can see from the swim bladder sticking out the side of his gills.
$10.5. Yeah, 10.5 kilos.
He measured out at 80 centimetres, and I misread the scales while I was out on the boat. I thought they read 10.5 kilos, but looking at the video evidence here, I can see they clearly read 11 kilos. Quite impressed.
Right, so that's where you Jimmy him. In there. Punch his bladder. Now, make sure that camera's on, yep. Oh dear, there we go. How's that for a tuskfish? Look at the size of the teeth in him. And he is thick. 80 centimetres, 10.5 kilos. Pretty happy with that for a first tuskfish. Well, a first big tuskfish in the bay. Really happy with it. Oh. Oh. Right. Now, get you in here. Bleed you. Oh.
I'll just mention that the rod and reel combo that I used there is about 40 years old. It's an old 6-inch Albi reel, and I probably haven't used it for 15 years. The reel's good, I gave it a service just recently, but the rod is on its last legs, I'll have to admit. It's missing a guide, which is easy enough to replace, but the reel seat is also loose on the rod. Now, I'm not sure whether I'll fix that or not. But you don't need top quality gear to catch top quality fish. If I could catch it on that, you could catch it on a hand line. I'll also just mention that 40-year-old rod has caught more big fish than all of my other rods put together. I got it from Mossops back in the mid-80s, and that was Mossops when they were back at in Annerley down Cornwall Street. I used to get all my tackle there in those days. I had plenty of bait set aside in the freezer for this trip. I had it all together in one of those small plastic garbage bags so that I could grab it quickly in the morning and get going. Unfortunately, I had a second garbage bag of the same colour in the freezer. with a little bit of bait that I wasn't planning to take. And I bet you can guess what happened. I'm always in a hurry to finish packing the boat in the morning and get going. In my haste, I grabbed the wrong bag. To be fair, I did have a quick look in the top and thought, yes, that's my bait. But it wasn't. I had some bait on top, but the rest of the bag had burley. I'd set that aside for another trip. Still, I caught one good fish with what I had. There wasn't much bait left by then, just enough for 2 more drops. The bait was taken fairly quickly, but I didn't land another fish. I was snagged once more. Perhaps a fish took it into the rocks, but if he did, the hook pulled. I really don't think I had one hooked that last time. I think that was a genuine snag. Still, I had plenty of fish to keep us eating for a couple of weeks, so I was happy with the trip. It made up for the last couple of trips where I was plagued by sharks. So this is the hook from that big Tuskie that I got. I didn't realise that he was in the rocks, so I didn't even realise I'd hooked him at first. I didn't see the bite at all. And when I got to wind the line in, I thought I was snagged at first. So I tried to pull the line up, as you would have seen. Tried to do it by hand, couldn't break it, and thought about it and thought, okay, I'll try and get my rig back. I'll take the boat off spot lock and I'll let it drift back to the other angle, so the line was going out the back there, and I thought, well, if I let the boat drift back, so I'm pulling the line the other way, it might just free it from the snag. Well, I got incredibly lucky. It didn't free it from the snag, but what it did do was pull that fish out of the rocks where it was hiding. And the effort of pulling that out straightened the hook a little bit, but fortunately not enough that he could get off. And I don't know whether you'll see it in the video there, but there's a terrific amount of abrasion on that leader. Along over half a metre of it, less than a metre, but over half a metre of that leader is very abraded. Probably, close to 3/4 of a metre of it. Very abraded, so I was just outright lucky, I think, to land him. I didn't even know I'd hooked this fella. He just got himself into that structure, and I thought I was snagged for a while, until I pulled him free and he started to fight. Huge scales on these things. Makes them a bit hard to scale, actually. The only good thing about it is I can see them. Oh, look at the size of those teeth. Wouldn't they make a mess of you? Oh, yeah, big fella. You can see the blue bones in there. Now, let's see if I can bring him over here and open him up. You see the blue bones in there now?
Well, not much in his stomach. No wonder he was hungry. Pin bones are just a bit too tough. Try this way and try something else on the other side. See which one works best. Oh, Jesus. Oh, that's what I call a fillet. Wow. I have to weigh that and see how much we've got on it. Figure out how to get those wings off after. Now I've got to figure out this side.
I have filleted a few big fish, but this was the first really big tusky. I found that it was a bit more difficult to fillet than I expected. I think the only solution to that is to get a couple more to practice on. Until then, good fishing.